So our guest speaker and topic today will be Martha Miranda. She is the Cyber Business Response COE Manager for ExxonMobil Technology and Engineering Company in Houston, Texas. And she's going to talk about the careers in ExxonMobil and then how ExxonMobil developed the cyber business response process for cyber reliance. So I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you,
Great.
Martha.
Good morning, everyone. Uh, am I sharing? Can you guys see my presentation? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thanks for the opportunity to join you today. And please, since it's a small group, I'm okay if you guys ask me questions along the way. Um, or if someone's monitoring the chat, please feel free to do that and share. So a little bit about me. Stephen had asked that I put together some materials about the journey that I've been on and how I got into the cyberspace. But first, some more personal items. I was born in the Dominican Republic. I grew up in Yonkers, New York. I did attend high school in the Dominican Republic, so I'm able to speak Spanish fluently, which is my mother tongue, but also obviously English and French. I have a master's and a bachelor's in chemical engineering. I went to a school that was called Manhattan College at the time, but has recently been renamed as Manhattan University. And I have been married. I should update this. It's more like I have to think about it, 29 years this year, to my college sweetheart. I have a couple of children. I heard somebody say they're going to university, they're going to Pittsburgh. I have a graduate from Baylor, and my daughter just graduated recently from Pittsburgh, and she's still living there. I have 33 years with ExxonMobil, and I'll speak to my career journey in a second. This is a little bit about my personal stuff, but I did want to, let you know that I am retiring on June 1 after a great career with the company. And I can tell you a little bit about my background here. So I had a number of internships in college. I had an internship with Nestle Foods, and then I went to Mobile Chemical, Mobile Oil. I worked on projects from laboratory to all the way to production lines. I had a co-op as well. So really have been in the oil and gas industry essentially since my sophomore year in college. I joined Exxon as an industrial lubricants sales territory manager, essentially selling industrial lubricants to general manufacturing and all kinds of other energy companies and chemical companies, steel mills, that kind of for rotating equipment, essentially, but also had provided a lot of technical support on more reliability on those equipment. So it was a kind of an engineering type role as well. And I also had some sales management roles as well. In that industrial lubricant space, I also just eventually ended up doing a number of roles in support of that business, pricing, market planning, and then sales support management. I've also had a role in distributor marketing. So we have a broad network of branded wholesalers and um, large distributors around the world. And my role was to help convert the marketing programs that the organization put together for commercial paper on ExxonMobil paper to those distributors, so that we're enabled to go and market and distribute our products. That led to a role as the supply chain manager in the Americas for the lubricants business. It's probably one of my most favorite roles. It allowed me to leverage my sales, marketing, operations skills, and marketing skills. And you're essentially in the center of the spider web, and you have instant gratification. Every decision you make, you're already seeing the outcome that day. I did have a role in Asia selling liquefied petroleum gas across all of Asia. I then became a customer service manager, and then I went into the retail fuels business, supporting our retail fuels portfolio, everything from product delivery and all the backcourt, what we call the backcourt. At the time, Exxon owned a number of retail stations, and we managed the stores at the retail service stations. And so there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes to manage that. I then went into what we call brand and product integrity management. So, Stephen, this is a new management system. And essentially, we had a product integrity management system that looked at product quality, risk management across the corporation. When we sold more of our service stations to third parties, they were now more responsible for the brand and how they represent us. And so we had to put some structure around standards and expectations for our branded wholesalers to maintain the integrity of our brands and reputation. And then that allowed me I did that role for like 5 years. All these other roles were like 1 or 2 years. And this was the longest I was in a role prior to this, the one I'm in now. And that allowed me to see the end-to-end value chain, if you will, everything from an order all the way to receiving cash and applying the cash across the corporation. So all these other roles kind of helped me build up to that. And then I understood the consequences of quality and brand integrity to the commercial aspect, but I also understood the challenges to sustain quality at the operating level. So I did that for about 5 years, and then I went into cyber business response. So at about 2017 timeframe, I don't know if you guys were familiar or remember, there was a NetPetya attack that started in the Ukraine and ended up impacting Federal Express, Merck Pharmaceutical, Maersk Shipping, and it was paralyzing to their enterprise and took them a long time to recover. At the time, Ken Frazier, who was the CEO for Merck Pharmaceutical, was on our board of directors and gave very strong guidance on, are you ready? What do you have? And prior to that, of course, you're all familiar with, the industrial controls at an individual site. Saudi Aramco happened. And so we were already on that path at the individual site level. But the NetPetya attack really opened our eyes about what are you doing at the enterprise level to maintain minimum viable company operations, right? How do you continue to operate as an organization? And so I came in, just as all of that was designed. We made the case for action. The organization determined its risk tolerance. And then my role, I came in as a project executive to help roll that out to the fuels and lubricants business. I eventually became the COE manager in that process. So I've been in this role for 6 years. And after that supply manager role, this is my favorite role. Because again, you're looking at the whole enterprise. This is a corporate risk, gets a lot of management committee support. It was top-down driven. And so you get a lot of engagement. And the corporation really takes this seriously, right? This is an evolving threat. We are each individual targets within the corporation. And as much as we put our emphasis on defense, and we all need to be ready to respond given the intensity of frequency and sophistication of events. And AI is introducing a whole new level of issues. We're also very careful to say that this is not to say that we are always 100% ready. As challenges arise, we know that hackers are out there looking at us as a critical infrastructure and critical to society provider of products. Yet we need to be humble, right? Because they're just as smart, right? And we're always in this evolution and trying to sustain readiness while preventing an event from happening. You can see a number of the projects that I've been on throughout my career. And so I'll pause here. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, I see stuff in the chat.
Not a question,
Okay.
Martha, but just an observation that this career journey is an amazing way to tell students that you're not born into a job. You kind of grow yourself as a human being. You find your passion, you find your bad spots, and you end up in places that basically take advantage of what you've learned, but also the kinds of stuff you learn on the job as well. It's an
Hmm.
amazing transformation that you shared with us. And I'm just thinking as an academic, as someone who's also been on a career journey, which is unusual, it just tells you that to be a strong cyber professional, that the audience that will be listening more on the video that is played back hundreds of times, they will be able to see that you didn't start saying, I want to be a cybersecurity expert. I want to do enterprise-wide risk management and so on. You just kind of grow into it, but you have to have some direction and some focus. And I think it's an astounding slide. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah, I would echo. I mean, this is about ExxonMobil's, how we manage people's careers over time. We're a long-term career oriented company, and we maximize people's skills, and we want people to reach their potential. And so we annually assess individual development plans, career plans, to determine what do you want to do, where does the company see you, how do we maximize those two things and grow you while leveraging your skill sets to help grow the company and achieve its objectives. So I do have to say that I, bought into that early on and been very blessed with the opportunities that I've been afforded. Yeah.
I would echo that as a retiree of ExxonMobil myself. And one of the things, as soon as you hire on, you learn about the technical and a managerial career pathways within Exxon and how you can go back and forth. They even have all their. I probably had about 4 pages worth of different training
Hmm.
programs I went through, in addition, paying for my master's degree. Uh, so and a graduate certificate from Rice. So I mean, they really care about careers, and like uh, this shows, and what Costas mentioned, you learn. One of the things I found that really helped from an IT perspective, because I was more of a computer science and control system person, but learning the business was so important, and you can see how this understanding the business leads to being over this cyber business response management system and the people there. So
Yeah.
I think it's important. And I know in our curriculum, when we developed it at ENMU at OSA, I tried to incorporate a lot of that, what I learned in my experience at Exxon and careers, that understanding the business is one of the most important things you can do if you're a cyber uh, specialist.
And that's exactly right. It's a really good point. I'll tell you that when we started this project, because it was a corporate-wide initiative, uh, the project executive was reporting to a president in one of the companies and led this effort. As we started getting to sustainment of the program, we essentially landed in IT risk management. So our center of excellence could be anywhere really in the organization, but we are looking at cybersecurity as part of IT risk management. We're also doing risk assessments across all of the technology that is used across the corporation. So it was a good fit. But to your point, my team is made up of a couple of IT people that are responsible for the IT business response, the incident management, and then supporting continuity of operations and returning to normal. But the rest of my team are all quote unquote business, commercial folks that understand the order to cash process, folks that understand operations, folks that understand our global business services. And so they bring a strong network and understanding of the commercial side of how each of these companies within the corporation work, what is their priority, what's the process flow, and the systems that are used to do that. And then we help translate that, right? So we're responsible for we're in IT, but we're responsible for everyone to be ready in a cyber event.
That's great.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and kind of share our framework. I talked a little bit about our journey. So we developed a framework early on that allowed us to define what are the most important elements in a cyber business response plan. And we then developed the tools and the BCP documents, the business continuity plans around that. Okay. So I've bucketed those elements into response, recovery, which is another major component, and then sustainment. And then within the response, we talk about what is the business continuity plan strategy, what's the decision-making structure when you essentially your crisis management structure, how the business leaders provide guidance and direction during a crisis. What are the tools that are needed to enable continuity of operations without the enterprise? And I should step back and say that this is really about an enterprise network, what we call the L4 network event. We have similar but separate activities for the L3 network. So this is only about the IT side, some integration with OT, but very limited. And so what are those IT enablers? What are the corporate process enablers? So the business process enablers, like how do you manage cash? How do you manage controls, maintaining our ability to manage credit and other risks? Then there's the business process enablers. So that's more about what are the workarounds that you need? What are the decisions around what is a minimum viable operation? And then communications, like what's your strategy on how you organize the organization to respond, and then the recovery and sustainment pieces. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about some of each individual elements, starting with corporate principles in our BCP strategy. So this is really about maintaining what we call our license to operate, ensuring that we can operate safely, that we can maintain critical to society products to our critical to society customers. And you might imagine that we fuel energy around the world. So, our role is pretty important. And also, where feasible, preserve corporate value, right? So it's safety, reputation, preserving corporate value. There are other considerations as part of this corporate principle in that our cyber resiliency framework is based off of NIST 2.0, the cybersecurity framework. So we start with govern, identify, and then work our way all the way to response and recovery. And this framework covers the first two elements, so governance and identify, and then response and recovery. The elements in the middle are, as you know, more cybersecurity, prevention, detection, containment. They form a part of this. They're essentially a part of the overall structure. But what my team does is making sure that those first two and the latter two are actionable across the cyber resiliency framework for the corporation. Our cyber philosophy is then really about what will we and what will we not do during a cyber event. So making sure that that's clear to the organization that we've made some choices and that we've established a level of risk tolerance that we are going to want to sustain, and that at that level of risk, this is what the framework needs to operate, making sure that we don't exceed that risk tolerance. There is also, obviously, you need to have a position on ransom response, and ours is we will not put our BCP together relying on payment of a ransomware attack, and it will require the CEO to make that decision. But our position is we will not pay a ransom. Those are determined on a case-by-case basis, as you all know. And lastly, from a commercial perspective, we want to make sure that we're clear around what we call sales allocation, right? So we have contractual obligations to our customers. And so we might have to cut back production. And so what does that look like commercially so that we honor those commitments for where we have those requirements? And then how do you address acts of God like this one, right? And when and where do we declare force majeure, and what's our position on that, and that we have alignment with our customers around that. So, and then in terms of decision-making structure, this is really breaking down what we call our emergency support groups. So this is essentially our crisis management. And we have a strong emergency preparedness and response organization. So we're not creating anything new. We're leveraging our existing framework, and they help the organization address specifically a cyber scenario, which is a little different than, a loss of supply or loss of people or loss of a facility, right? And this encompasses to some extent all of that, with the exception of loss of people, right? That was more about COVID and perhaps strikes and things like that. So we have a framework, we have a tiered governance structure around crisis management, already exists, but we enable them for understanding how they operate in a cyber scenario. And then on the IT enablers, there's a core set of things that we protect. So what is the alternative hardware that the organization is going to use, assuming existing hardware is contaminated, right? Because it's all connected to the enterprise. And then what's the logistics around that? How do you distribute that? What alternative, not just the users, but what alternative operating environments do we need? Other cloud applications or things like that. Offline file backup is a good segue to that, right? So you need to enable a cyber business response, you need to understand your cyber critical business processes to maintain a minimum viable operation. And you need to understand then what are the critical files that you need to be able to execute in a constrained environment. So having some kind of backup environment that is separate from your existing network that you're able to leverage, in an alternative environment. You also may need alternative internet connectivity. So your internet may be down. And so how do you, connect to hotspots, digimodems, work somewhere else? What are the logistics of that? How do we make sure we have a backup plan for that? In these days, most people can just go home and work from home, but there are specific areas where that is not acceptable, and folks need to collaborate to be able to execute. And then, we have many, many ways to communicate with the organization today in an existing operation. What does that look like when all your systems are down on an enterprise level? What are your other sources of communicating to the organization? How do you notify them of the event? How do you tell them what to do in that space? And then also, it ties back to the communication planning. How do you communicate externally, right? So there's also some discussion on that. On the corporate process enablers, so this is really about preserving corporate value and ties into some of the risk tolerance discussions. But this is really about how do you maintain cash, liquidity, what do you need to do to maintain your, Sarbanes-Oxley Act requirements, SOX requirements from a controls perspective? What will you do? What will you defer? What will you waive? And then making sure that the organization is aware of that, that the business continuity plans align with our compliance requirements and our regulatory requirements. And then credit is also, what is our position on checking credit during an event? Do you, don't you, is it tiered? Those kinds of decisions should be made. And then obviously everyone wants to get paid. So that's the first question people ask me is, okay, am I going to get paid if something happens? And so you need to have a strong position on that. And then from a business process enabler, you need to generate simplified production plans, right? You're not going to be operating business as usual. This is about treading water, minimum viable operations. What are the minimum viable activities that would support that to maintain our risk tolerance? And that means perhaps not optimizing things. Perhaps that means no marketing, no promotions activities going on. Maybe establishing certain thresholds for invoices. You have a lot of intensity on those applications. And so can you handle that manually? Probably not. And so what does that look like? Whether it's tools or whether it's pen and paper, what does that look like? And then that leads to the alternative process tools. So if the organization feels like pen and paper is untenable, then what alternative tools do you need? Simple, minimum viable product to be able to manage the organization's activities. And then obviously then the BCPs themselves. What does your BCP look like? How do you document your operating procedures? What I like to say, who's who in the zoo in terms of roles and responsibilities, and who is executing, who is critical, who is not. Not everyone will be doing the things that they usually do, right? And then communication, again, I mentioned this earlier about it kind of ties back to the alternative medium for communication. How do you notify the organization through alerts? What are your holding statements, right, so that you can communicate externally to the outside world, and having those ready with pre-approved language. You likely will modify that, but you at least have something that's at the ready for you to be able to respond. We all know that during a cyber event, communications is where most organizations fall, both internally and externally. And so how do you get ready for that as much as you can? Because obviously we're planning for a worst case scenario here. It's never going to work the way you plan it. And so how do you have agile capabilities to do all of that, including communications? And then, we've been focusing a lot on this recently around supply chain implications. So more and more organizations are going to software as a service, and you have a lot of third-party providers executing processes on our behalf. You also have strategic partners that they themselves might experience a cyber event. And so how do we maintain minimum viable operations if they have an event? How do we ensure that if they're supporting us, that they are also ready to help us support if we have an event? So those are all part of, having a robust plan around that. And with all of the systems supply chain issues, CrowdStrike, for example, had something that happened to them. Salesforce has had issues with, and they're a supplier, but then it's their supplier and their supplier's supplier. So how does that work? What are the priorities, and what does this whole framework look like for those folks? And then we step into recovery, right? And when we talk about recovery, we talk about restoring the system. We talk about restarting business operations and staged business operations restart. And then how do you reintegrate the data that you've been collecting over this period? And so that whole recovery process requires a lot of integration. And so how do you plan for that? You have people responding and maintaining the operations, but then you have people also that are simultaneously working on that recovery plan. And so making sure we have a way to restart and meet our fiduciary responsibilities with compliance and SEC filings, et cetera. And then how do you accelerate critical applications? So what are those critical applications that must be restored first? And then how long does that you think that's going to take you? And then how long do you think the restart and reintegration might happen? Which is the next one. And then what's your plan for the rest of the enterprise applications that might not be considered the most critical, right? What's your plan to do that? And when and what does that phased approach look like? And then lastly, when we started this, we thought that the project would be done, we do a couple of years of sustainment, and then we would turn it back into, regular BCP activity that each company within the corporation manages today, just like we manage all other BCPs. There is no other central organization that does this for any other BCP activity. But because this is all across all the value chains, there's a unique need to maintain that integration, right? So that if one business is planning on doing one thing, that the relationship or cross-functional interfaces with the other parts of the organization are clear and have really detailed alignment on operating procedures, that they understand how they impact each other. And so that's our role as a COE, really. We own the program, we own the effectiveness of the program, and we own the corporate resiliency and readiness. But then the individual BCP owners own how effective they are in operating. And so we call that first line of defense, second line of defense. The first line of defense are the business folks that own their BCPs and need to respond. We are the second line of defense. We are the subject matter experts. We provide structure, tools, enable them to be ready. And then audit is our third line of defense, right? Making sure that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing or preparing for what we say we're going to be doing. And so business continuity plan exercises are part of that. So it's not just having these documents on the shelf, on paper. It's really about exercising them, building organizational muscle memory so that you understand what your role is. What do I do? What don't I do? What does the framework allow? What are my tools? Can I access the tools? Can I access my files? How do I practice this so that I can understand, at a minimum when this happens? And then to do that, you need to build a resiliency culture, right? So we're very good at making sure people understand their role. We all play a role in being cyber ready for the organization, and that includes not clicking on things, being alert to scams, to social engineering, all the things that, fundamentals of avoiding a cyber attack. But then you also need to be ready if you do have one. What does that look like? What role do I play? Especially in a corporation of our size, people need to understand that it's not just prevention, which is where we want to focus, quite frankly, but all of those investments could go by the wayside if somebody does something silly, perhaps, that, they're caught with all the sophistication of phishing, scams, et cetera. And so how do we maintain that culture? That's part of our team's role as well. And then, Stephen, to your point, linkages to management systems. So we already have an operations integrity management system that guides our safety, security, health, and the environment activities. They provide the framework for business continuity plans across the corporation, and we are built into that. So we're not this is a framework, we're not creating a separate management system. It already addresses that. So this fits into that. We already have a controls integrity management system that guides, our controls integrity, right? Segregation of duty, compliance requirements with our fiduciary role. And so we're not inventing new things. We're working within that framework. And then I mentioned brand and product integrity. Customers will be upset if something like this happens. And so what does that mean to our brand integrity? What will we do to try to protect that? And then how do you maintain product quality, right? This is your limited systems perhaps, and you need to make sure that the product that you are delivering is suitable for use and meets our standards for quality. And then there's this element of human capital management. So how do you, and this sort of ties into the culture. So how do you develop the skills across the organization? Because not everybody can participate in a drill, right? People are running the business. And so it's a subset of the organization that's doing these drills. So how do you build in the skills, the understanding from a new person that's joined the company to a senior employee so they understand more about this? And so that's really around training, skills development, knowledge, maintaining knowledge across the organization. So I've been speaking for quite a bit. That is our framework, and that is what we worked on or have been working on and maintaining for the last, 7, 8 years or so.
Yeah, it looks great. It looks familiar. We had a similar thing, not to the extent, but it was an enterprise view of business continuity, disaster recovery, and as you mentioned, it wasn't just on paper. We used to have a disaster event that would be unannounced, and then we would have one that was announced that we were planning for, and you can see there's a lot involved in this and a lot of our students don't realize the impact of these risk assessments and business continuity disaster recovery. It's one of the most critical things, I think. It's probably the most important cyber thing you can do, in my opinion. We didn't have it in the CAE community. They have what they call knowledge units, Martha, and we just had about a year ago, I think we redid the knowledge units to upgrade them and also to add new ones. Well, when we were doing the analysis, I was looking at that. We didn't have a disaster recovery business continuity KU and that was one we added because it's so important to keeping the company going, really, in business.
Yeah.
So
And there's a lot more regulations coming as well, right? So when the Colonial Pipeline event happened, for example, the TSA instituted some minimum requirements and expectations that are regulated. And NIST 2.0 was born from that, around adding more rigor on incident response, more on a lot of elements, governance being one of them. That was an added pillar to the NIST framework, but also incident management. Now, one of the challenges I always have when communicating externally, and we talk about this is in addition to incident management, right? So cybersecurity responds to the event, detects it, contains it, and gets us ready for restoring systems and disaster recovery. But that's one element of the whole corporation being able to continue to operate. So I always try to make that distinction when we're talking to folks because people immediately default to, well, how do I manage the forensics and the cleaning of the systems and that which is very important, but that this is covering that and the ability to continue to operate.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And the another question I get is, ExxonMobil is a big corporation. We can afford to spend time on this. And for smaller companies, we can't look at all of this way. And so what I encourage folks to think about is this is risk management. So you decide what is the most critical thing that you must sustain, and then decide what level of risk you're willing to accept, and then build your workarounds around that. You know, we just have a very detailed approach because we have a very complex organization that provides really critical to society products. But that doesn't mean that you can't do this for a smaller or mid-sized company. It just means about what choices do you need to make.
Yeah, that's a good point. And when I was living in Ruidoso, which is a very small rural community, uh, we actually were creating kind of internships with the small businesses in the Chamber of Commerce for students to help develop a risk assessment for the small businesses, so that they can understand what really keeps their is the critical thing that keeps their business going, and then how do you protect that, and what kind of risk are you involved? Can you accept or not accept? And so yeah,
Yep.
I think that's true. This is a Fortune 100 look, not a small business look, but you can do the same thing if you follow
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And to your students, this is an opportunity for folks to understand. So when you think about business continuity from a cybersecurity lens, there's this element of you start, in my opinion, because I'm a commercial resource, you start from what are the critical business processes. Then you determine, what are the tools that support those critical business processes. Then you look at the applications, and then you look at the critical infrastructure that you need. So you're looking at things holistically across the corporation. And having a cybersecurity background is very helpful in looking at that, but having a view of what is it that you're protecting exactly, right? You're not just
Yeah,
looking at the infrastructure and the applications. You're looking at protecting the whole ecosystem, right?
yeah, that's true. Any questions from anyone? Comments?
Yeah, Stephen, again, a little bit carrying out the direction that you started. Martha, we're all of us educators. So the question is, how do we prepare students to be able to execute some of these excellent intersections between the elements of the strategy, the components of the strategy, if we're providing, let's say, a cybersecurity analyst, a cybersecurity operator in some branches of an industry or a company, how do we make sure that they're kind of aware of the non-technical aspects of resilience? I think that the bottom line is that you're showing us that and reminding us that a cyber attack isn't just an attack of bits and bytes. It has impact on operations, has impact on culture, it has impact on long-term planning, on revenues, blah, blah, blah. So any clues, any suggestions that a university or community college faculty member could take to not necessarily to implement this framework, but to prepare a student that might be given a framework like this? Does that my question make sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when I was a student and I had no idea that I was going to go on this path. I was worried about pots and pans and how do you operate an organization or a unit, right, to make a product. So I wasn't thinking broadly about the commercial aspects of that. I was also just focused on the technical side, right, when I was a student. But I ended up having internships that allowed me to see the commercial impacts, right? So, why are we making this product? Why am I doing this testing? Why am I doing a pilot, a proof of concept, a proof of performance? Why am I then moving that to production? And how do I do that so that the product actually works, right? We're able to sell it. It's a usable product. And so I think that changed my lens a little bit. And then when I joined the company, obviously I was looking at how companies operate. What are their products? How do we enable them to have reliable equipment that continues to allow them to continue to operate and in a reliable and safe way, so they don't have any downtime and can continue to make product, right? So over time, I kind of build that knowledge to your point earlier, Costas. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name
Yeah,
correctly.
perfect, perfect.
And so giving students the opportunity or encouraging them to seek those opportunities, beyond the technical side. Clearly, you need to demonstrate the technical side, right? Because,
Mhm.
this is the fundamental thing that you're teaching. But what other avenues are out there? Bring in external speakers, perhaps like what you're doing with me today. Have symposiums, have industry come in. It sounds like that's all you do today, but from an education perspective, I think enabling, maybe you have a class just dedicated to this, and you put together a curriculum that looks at all the dimensions of this. There's a lot of, there's the Cyber Readiness Institute that's out there. They have a business continuity planning dimension. They provide small business. They're focused on small businesses, but they provide the whole gambit of cyber resiliency, right? So, what do you need to do from an IT side? What do you need to do from communications between systems? How does that relate to how you operate the business? And so, creating that expertise within a company is what they're doing, but you can leverage those materials to be able to, and there's tons out there. There's lots of companies that do this, by the way, and it's an emerging area because most companies are now realizing that it's not just about incident response. This could paralyze your whole corporation. So yeah, those are when I think about education, even within ExxonMobil, we call it 7 times 7 different ways using my marketing hat. You have different channels where you communicate to different people and you do people learn differently. And so you need to tailor your training, your communications to what we call those personas, those folks that you're targeting. So maybe it's partnering with your marketing organizations, if you have marketing or MBA or business degrees, maybe it's partnering with them to come up with some kind of curriculum. So just some ideas. Don't know if
Yeah,
That's
that's
thank
the
you.
helpful. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the
very helpful.
whole
Thank you, Martha.
that's the whole goal of SciAD, is trying to integrate cybersecurity within those other disciplines. So we have faculty from from business degree programs or certification programs, and then of course even automotive or engineering, all these different.
Yeah.
That's the good thing about SciAD, I think, that we've seen.
Yeah.
So
The other thing I will tell you, I am not an IT resource, and I I came into this and I had to learn a lot about cybersecurity and practices, but I don't know all the technology that is used. I have a general understanding, but this is also applicable to your non-IT students. How are they thinking about um, operating a business, marketing their portfolio? How does cyber fit into that? Just like how does product quality fit into that? How does discipline around protecting my brand? What's my discipline on making sure that we're safe and delivering products that matter, right? So they too need to understand this new dimension of the ability to sell the products that they want to sell or manage or account for financing, all of that. So that's another perspective that you might want to think about as well, right?
Mm.
that sounds great. Any other questions? We got to about wrap up here in a few
Yeah, I need to
minutes.
go. Yes,
And can you stop sharing so I can bring up a
yes.
screen for our thank you. So congratulations again, Martha, for your retirement. So
Thank
we could always use you in academia. Well, you're
you.
close to Lone Star, some of those.
No,
but
I don't have any. I have other plans, but I might get bored. So maybe I'll consider it.
sounds good. And the any any other items from anybody on the webinar here?
No, the other thought I had, Stephen, is Stephen and I and others on NCyTE and Michael Bird, who's on the call as well, have developed some international organization called the
Mm.
International Cybersecurity Education Collaborative. And we have monthly discussions about strategies that straddle the US, UK,
Mm.
Australia, and others. One of the strategies we're using in 2026 is to do deeper dives into particular sectors. So we've looked at the financial sector, we've looked at maritime, we've looked at a couple of space. So it could be that the oil or related fields, energy in general, could be a sector, and you'd be great because you have a very succinct way of presenting things. And also, you highlight this eclectic strategy of one's life, which I think would be a great beacon of hope for many people. So thanks again, Martha, for sharing with us.
Yeah,
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
yeah, we'll follow up. And I was actually going to pull our UK Exxon person, Nigel Bingham,
Mm.
who I work with. But yeah, maybe we could get a group of both Martha and Nigel to talk about this stuff. So anyway, thank
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
Martha, and
I
thanks
won't be
everybody.
able, I won't be able to represent ExxonMobil as a retiree.
No, I know
But certainly I know people in the company, and I had a lot of support from my management to be a part of this conversation, right?
Yeah,
So because we're always looking for talent. We also want to learn from you what you're seeing as well. So
yep, that's good. I'll be trying to get you in one of the retirement luncheons.
thank you.
And I put the QR code, so fill out the survey. We didn't have that many people show up today, but I think the video is going to be very valuable for our faculty, and we'll be promoting that over the next month. Thanks,
Thanks,
Martha.
everyone. Have a good
Great. Thank you,
rest of the
Martha.
day. Have a good weekend.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you.
so I'll stop sharing.